This is Carol Foster of 2 Timothy 2:15 Resources, and I am so excited that you're going to join me today as we study God's Word. The response new Messianic believers give when asked why they initially visited a Messianic congregation is, "We knew there had to be more." As we study together, we will begin to see that yes, indeed, there has to be more. For additional study aids to assist you in studying along with us, go to our website, sectim.org.
I'm so glad that you decided to join us today as we continue our study in the Epistle of Yaakov, which he wrote to the Messianic believers scattered in the diaspora. We had just completed our study of verses 11 and 12 of chapter 4. If you missed this or any of our previous programs, please go to www.HebrewNationOnline under Torah Studies and this program. There has to be more to hear these. I have also placed free downloadable study helps on my website, www.sectim.org. Let's move on to our next section in Chapter 4. I've titled this section, Arrogant Self-Sufficiency, and it covers the final verses in this chapter. They are verses 13 through 17. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. In verse 13, Yaakov continues his attack against presumption by focusing on the successful businessmen of his day. In this case, Yaakov's statements, "Come now," could be better understood in this way. Think about what you're saying. His readers should take note of all of their statements about the future of their money-making ambitions. The author's hypothetical example hangs on the stereotypical attitudes of the overconfident business dealer. To express this, Yaakov used a series of future indicative verbs. The first verb is stated, while the others are implied. We will go to this or that city. We will spend a year there. We will carry on business, and we will make money. They were, of course, oblivious to the presumptiveness of predicting their own futures. Instead, they were caught up by their winning formula. The timing, the journey to a financial center, the securing of a temporary residence there, the possession of sufficient time to do business, and the expectation to turn a profit. But the divine will had been left out of this formula entirely, just as it was left out of the compulsion to judge others in the previous verse. Time and space belong only to Jehovah, and therefore all the features necessary for human action are dependent upon him. In this case, Yaakov's deluded readers thought and spoke as though the whole business enterprise required only their self-assuredness for control of circumstances and the achievement of the desired goals. Yaakov's tone is brisk and rebuking, a tone reinforced by "you who say" that immediately follows. Coming in place of the author's usual address to his readers as brethrens, this tone might suggest that he intends here to turn his attention to people outside the church, letting the believers listen in so they can learn from the admonition. However, we've already noted that the content of the paragraph seems to assume that it was addressing the believers. The tone Yaakov adopts suggests, however, that he regards the attitude of these believers as unworthy of who they really are. It reminds me of a father forced to rebuke his children for behavior not in keeping with the family values. Yaakov's quotation of the merchants that he addresses here, of course, is fictional, as the language this or that city makes clear. What he does is to put words on their lips that pointedly bring out to the open the underlying attitude that they were adopting in the plans that they made. Here are people, says Yaakov, who are deliberately and self-confident planners. They decide where they will go, when they will go, and how long they will stay. Furthermore, they are quite sure about the outcome of all of these plans. They will make money. The picture he paints here would be familiar to his first-century readers. This time period was marked by growing commercial activity, and especially in the Hellenistic cities of Palestine. Jews were especially active in these ventures. Many had left Palestine to settle in cities throughout the Mediterranean world in pursuit of financial gain. And, of course, the picture is equally familiar to us in our modern world. Modes of transportation and distance have changed, but the bottom line has not. However, we need to guard against a misinterpretation at this point. It would be terribly tempting, and some interpreters have succumbed to the temptation, to find here a rebuke of those who are out to make a profit at all. As we will see in the following verses, Yaakov is not rebuking these merchants for their plans or even for their desire to make a profit. He rebukes them rather for this worldly self-confidence that they exhibit in pursuing these goals, a danger to which highly motivated and driven business people are particularly susceptible. And we should guard here against another kind of misinterpretation, the idea that Yaakov is forbidding believers from all forms of planning or of concern for the future. Taking out life insurance and saving for retirement, for instance, are not condemned by the author. These may very well be a form of wise stewardship. What he rebukes here, as verse 16 will make it clear, is any kind of planning for the future that stems from human arrogance in our ability to determine the course of future events. Verse 14 reads, "Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away." Again, we see that Yaakov struck at his readers' presumption by questioning their view of time and human life within it. They apparently, having spoken as though they had control over their own destinies and knew the outcome of the future, each and every day of their lives. Yaakov reminded them of their ignorance even of tomorrow. The irony of boasting believers is dramatic here. They did not know anything about their future experience. This boast served for the author as another example of self-deception to be replaced by knowledge according to God's standards. We have seen that this has been one of the themes throughout this epistle. I'm referring to chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, verses 6 and 7, verses 13, 16, 19, and 26, and in chapter 3, verse 1 and 14, as well as our current chapter 4, verses 4 through 5. Their arrogance, of course, was rooted not only in their immature faith, but in their very nature as human creatures. Yaakov was moved to his powerful metaphor for the fragility and the shortness of life. "What is your life?" he asked, and then answered, "You are a mist." The metaphor of mist is referring to the duration or the length of a life rather than the quality of life. Mists do not last long in Palestine. Their form is extremely transitory. They appear with a dew and quickly dissipate. But this evaporation is a fitting way to refer to the fleeting attribute of human life that Yaakov has already addressed in chapter 1, verses 10 through 11, in the case of the rich man who puts his value and his trust on money and earthly possessions. No one knows the times and length of his or her own life. Without trust in Jehovah, believers become nearly indistinguishable from the wicked, who take no account of Jehovah. These basic truths must be rehearsed. Just as the truth of Jehovah and his sole lordship are necessary, corrections that need to be made to our attitudes of self-sufficiency and total selfish independence that is common to mankind. We also need to realize that it is only our Creator, Elohim, that knows the length of our days. Yaakov's point is clear enough. Human life is insubstantial and transitory. Here 1 minute and gone the next. Illness, accidental death, or the return of Messiah could cut short our lives just as quickly as the morning sun dissipates the mist, or as a shift in wind directly blows away smoke. But, as so often the case, especially those of Yaakov's writings, are some words of Yeshua. In Luke 12, verse 15, Yeshua warns the crowds about covetousness and reminds them that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. In a brief parable, he illustrates his point with a rich man who, like Yaakov's merchants, made definite plans for acquiring more goods, but who was prevented from executing his plan by his death. This passage contains several themes that the author of this epistle utilizes, both here and again in chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. This warning is true for us today. We get caught up in the drive for accomplishments or riches and become totally focused on what we do or can do. We plan and totally leave Jehovah out of the equation. This warning that was given to the Yaakov's readers could have as easily been written to each one of us today. Verse 15 tells us, "Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that." In view of what Yaakov's readers had been reminded of, they should have spoken without presumption of Jehovah's will. There is one norm by which the life of faith is lived out in the world. If Jehovah wills. This phrase is a common Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament expression, and is the expression of trust in Jehovah for his ordering of every realm of human life. Yeshua came to do his Father's will. This he also commanded his disciples, and doing this will, the Father's will, even for those doing business, is commanded by Yaakov. The author clearly was reflecting one of the primary themes of this letter. Trusting Jehovah should be seen in the believer's speech and actions that is being shaped by the Father's will. Thus, the second part of this conditional phrase is also important. If Adonai wills, then we will live and do this or that. Does this statement also point to Yaakov's earlier warnings about being merely hearers and not doers of the word? And does it recall that faith must express itself actively as contrasted with a kind of faith alone mindset? The unity of the letter suggests that there is a connection, but the connection with Yaakov's boldness against the rich is more significant. The significance is surprising, perhaps, for here, in this single verse, the author is supplying a reconciling word. If only the rich, the businessmen, large and small, would trust their enterprise to the Lord. This would satisfy the requirement of faith. Mature speech and action demonstrate the genuineness and humility of faith, even in the plans of business. They should remember that if every good and perfect gift comes from Jehovah, then so does every good outcome of a human purpose. This entire passage is one of the most important biblical sources for a believer in Messiah's ethic code of business. There is nothing evil or wrong, per se, about anything Elohim has made and put at our disposal to use. But we need to remember that He, Elohim, is not at our disposal. Neither are His standards for faith at our disposal to change or to ignore. Nothing in a person's life lies outside of our walk of faith and the good deeds that must flow from that faith. Life is lived, but only if Jehovah wills, just as assuredly as deeds are done only if Jehovah wills. His readers' actions had been based on the earlier stated problem, you do not have because you do not ask God. What kind of faith was theirs? They did not make their plans in a devout way, acknowledging Jehovah in all their plans and expectations. The question of an active versus a permissive will of Jehovah is not an issue here. No believer should test him by acting apart from the norm of faith. Indeed, if believers will say, God willing, their prayers will result in their receiving from God, as we have previously stated in this chapter in verse 3. You ask and you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. Let's move on to verse 16. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Boasting has a place in the believer's life. if it is done in view of the work that Jehovah has done in and through our lives and our walk with Him. But such is not the case with the believers that Yaakov was confronting here. Instead of confessing their dependence on the will of Jehovah, their arrogance had erupted and overflowed with bragging. More precisely, to brag here means to manifest the pretense of the self-creation and sole responsibility of one's own well-being. The condemnation of pretense is similar within the context of loving the world rather than Jehovah and taking pride in one's possessions. We see similarities in both. In Yochanan, chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, we read, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." And again in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, "For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, and unholy." Extra-biblical literature also abounds with condemnations of this presumptive attitude. The relation between friendship with the world and pretense should not be missed here. After all, the worldly power of speech is all about boasting and its heart attitude of pretentiousness. This spiritual fact is extremely difficult to grasp for American believers today. We are so tempted to participate in the celebration of the self-made man. Yaakov wanted the believers to have absolutely nothing to do with boasting and arrogance. All self-referential statements of certainty about the future are wickedness. In such statements, there is no willingness to yield to Jehovah's will. Worst of all, the temptation is to make pronouncements that claim the sure knowledge of His will for the future to one's own benefit. Thus, Yaakov was quite strict. Not only did he prohibit boasting in possessions, but persons must not even boast in their plans for the future. Such boasting stems from a prayerless life, a prideful and presumptuous way of life. The author declared, "What else is this but wickedness?" We see this in today's society as well. Individuals boasting in accomplishments, finances, education, positions, and even in their families and friends. When we no longer look to and acknowledge that it is Jehovah who has provided all that we have and all that we are, then we are boasting in and about ourselves. This is diametrically opposed to what the Word has told us and becomes worldly and evil. We fail to give the Creator of the universe, the Savior of our souls, the one who has provided us with all good things, the credit, honor, and recognition that is His. We literally take Jehovah off the throne of our lives and put ourselves on that throne. It is Jehovah that we have dethroned in our lives. Now listen closely to what I have said. It is Yaakov's readers, you and I, that have taken him off the throne of our lives. He has never left his throne, and nor will he ever. We have made the decision in our lives and for ourselves. However, this does not change who and what he is. He is, he was, and he will forever be Jehovah. To think otherwise is nothing short of arrogance. To put it perhaps more clearly, he is Jehovah and King, and we are not. Verse 17 is the last verse in this chapter, but is also the last verse in the portion of the chapter that I've titled Arrogant Self-Sufficiency. It reads, "Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." In this final verse, Yaakov summed up this section by a reference to a fundamental principle of faith. At first, this verse may seem detached from what came immediately prior to it, but the author has connected it with then or therefore. The good that believers know they are called to do requires confessing dependence upon Jehovah's will in everything they do, and we do. Is there not a close relation here with Rabbi Shaul's principles, which we find in Romans chapter 14, verse 23? Everything that does not come from faith is sin. That which is of faith is virtually synonymous with that which is the good because of the gift of Jehovah. We saw this as we studied earlier in this epistle, chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we should be a kind of first fruits among his creations. The problem of disconnecting what one does from what one knows is another expression of the double-mindedness and inactive faith so rife within Yaakov's audience. We discovered this in chapter 1, verses 22 through 27. But prove yourselves doer of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. But one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. If anyone thinks himself to be religious, and yet does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is worthless. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and our Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. We also see this same concept brought to us in chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. What use is it, my brethren, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, Go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Even so, faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. But someone may well say, You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one. You will do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But are you willing to recognize, you foolish fellow, that faith without works is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up Isaac his son on the altar? You see that faith was working with his works, and as a result of the works, faith was perfected, and the scriptures were fulfilled, which says, And Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see that a man is justified by works, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. Because they were believers and had heard the word of Jehovah, they knew the good, but because they had not received it with meekness and humility, they contradicted what they knew and committed sin. This principle was, in all likelihood, well known to Yaakov's readers, but they probably had not expected it to be cited in this connection. The principle of doing only what one knows to be good begins with placing all of the intentions of the heart before Jehovah. Only by doing what is good can we then wholeheartedly put our trust in Him. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, or would you like to hear them again, please go to www.HebrewNationOnline to our studies and this program, There Has to Be More. If you would like additional study aids, they are available on my website, www.sectim.org. Thank you for joining us today, and please join us next time as we continue our in-depth study in this epistle of Yaakov.
Thank you for joining us today as we delved into the beautiful truths of God's Word to indeed discover that there has to be more. I pray that the Word applied to your daily life will bring a deeper understanding of His love letter written just to you. Let me remind you that we have additional study aids to assist you with our studies together on our website, sectim.org. May this day fill you with the love of God, joy, and shalom, nothing missing, nothing broken in your life.